James Carter took a deep breath as he stepped into the large hall of the Willow Creek Town Hall, where his swearing-in ceremony as the town's police chief was taking place. The room was packed, but the gazes fixed on him were not ones of admiration. Instead, they carried skepticism and prejudice. James was accustomed to this, but today, the weight of the pressure felt heavier than ever. James was the first black man to be appointed police chief in Willow Creek, a town infamous for its history of racial injustice. To many, he wasn't just a police chief. He was a symbol of change they weren't ready to embrace. As he ascended the podium, the light from the chandeliers reflected off his neatly pressed uniform. He grasped the microphone, his voice steady yet sincere. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here today not just as a police chief but as someone who believes in fairness and equality. Willow Creek is more than just a town. It is our home. I am committed to doing everything in my power to build trust between law enforcement and the community." Applause broke out, though it was scattered. Some people appeared uncomfortable, particularly Derek Thompson, a veteran lieutenant in the police department, arms crossed, his cold gaze fixed on James as if he were eagerly waiting for him to fail. On his very first day in office, James felt the palpable distance from his colleagues. During the first meeting, as James outlined his plans for reform, Derek smirked and said, "Reform? You think Willow Creek needs reform? We've been doing our jobs just fine for years without someone from the big city coming in to tell us how to do it." James remained calm, though he could feel the contempt in every word Derek spoke. Several other officers, loyal to Derek, nodded quietly in agreement. James chose not to respond to the provocation. He knew that changing entrenched mindsets would take time and tangible actions, not arguments, but he also understood that this quiet resistance would be his greatest challenge. The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere. Returning to his office, James hung up a photo of his family. In the picture was his mother, a resilient woman who had raised him in a struggling neighborhood. She always told him, "You have to do what's right, even when the whole world is against you." James resolved to live up to her words. He would not let her down. 2 weeks later, on a late evening, James decided to leave his office and walk home. He wanted to experience the real life of Willow Creek, not just see it through dry reports. Meanwhile, Derek and his partner, Ryan, were on patrol in their squad car. They spotted James, dressed in plain clothes, walking slowly down an empty street. "Look at that," Derek said, raising an eyebrow. "Looks like we've got a suspicious stranger here." Ryan hesitated. "That could be someone from town." Derek smirked. "Don't be naive. Who walks alone at this hour unless they're up to something shady?" The car abruptly pulled up beside James. Derek stepped out, his tone authoritative. "Hey, you, stop right there." James turned around, frowning but silent. He raised his hands slightly, keeping a cooperative demeanor. "Good evening. I'm just walking home." But Derek ignored his explanation. He stepped closer, his voice dripping with prejudice. "Papers? Who are you? What are you doing here?" James tried to stay calm, though the obvious hostility in Derek's tone angered him. He took out his police ID and held it up. "I'm James Carter. I think you know who I am." But Derek didn't bother to look at the ID. He sneered. "James Carter? The name rings a bell, but I've never heard of you. Got anything else to prove it?" Ryan began to sense something was wrong, but before he could say anything, Derek grabbed James and shoved him against the wall. James pulled his arm back but refrained from using force. He raised his voice. "I'm the police chief. What do you think you're doing?" Derek smirked, but his grin quickly faded when a few bystanders started recording the incident on their phones. James locked eyes with Derek, his voice steady and resolute. "You're going to answer for this." The video of the incident quickly went viral on social media, sparking widespread outrage. The next morning, when James returned to the police station, he noticed the change in the way people looked at him, expressions mixed with unease and curiosity. An internal investigation was immediately launched. Derek was summoned for questioning, but he remained defiant. I followed procedure. He was uncooperative and acting suspiciously. James sat across from Derek in the conference room. His voice was cold but controlled. I was fully cooperative. Your actions didn't just violate protocol. They revealed your personal bias. Derek stayed silent, but the unease on his face was unmistakable. The meeting ended without a clear resolution. But James knew this was just the beginning. That evening, as James returned home, he checked his phone and found hundreds of messages from friends and former colleagues, all expressing their support. One message from his mother touched him deeply. "Son, remember, light always triumphs over darkness. I believe in you." James resolved not to let the actions of one man destroy what he was striving to build. He decided to use this incident as an opportunity to address the root problems in Willow Creek and create lasting change. The next morning, the town of Willow Creek was engulfed in chaos. A video of the encounter between James and Derek had gone viral at lightning speed. Media outlets big and small flooded into the town, interviewing residents and reporting on the incident. James, although mentally prepared, couldn't help but be surprised by the extent of the situation's reach. Meanwhile, at the police department, the atmosphere had become stifling. Derek Thompson entered the room with a grim look, trying to maintain his composure. Yet every gaze from his colleagues carried a sense of scrutiny. Whispers filled the air, fragments of conversations slipping through. He did that to the chief himself? What an idiot. The internal investigation was expedited under pressure from public opinion and the media. The investigative committee demanded detailed statements from everyone involved, including Derek and Ryan. Ryan, although not directly involved in Derek's actions, also felt the heavy weight of the situation. James couldn't avoid the attention of the media. Some reporters approached him right at the police station, firing pointed questions. "Sir, what are your thoughts on Lieutenant Derek Thompson's actions? Do you think this reflects racial discrimination within the police force?" James maintained a calm demeanor and responded, "I believe this incident is not just a personal issue but a reflection of a system that needs reform. I don't see this as a failure but as an opportunity for us to make meaningful changes together." The media continued to delve deeper into the incident. They interviewed residents of the town, investigated the history of the Willow Creek Police Department, and uncovered previous incidents that had been concealed, involving abuse of power and bias. One evening, James received a call from an old friend, Linda White, now a prominent social activist. Linda said, "James, your story has touched the hearts of many people, but if you want to turn it into a force for change, you need to speak out more boldly. You can't do this alone." James agreed. With Linda's support, he began organizing community dialogues. He invited residents, religious leaders, and even police officers to discuss the barriers and biases that existed. Derek, although he didn't attend the dialogues, felt increasingly uneasy hearing his colleagues talk about change. He began to realize that he was becoming the focus of criticism. As the pressure from the media and the public mounted, James realized that this incident wasn't just about him. It was about an entire community weary of injustice. Yet deep inside, he carried a profound pain. One evening, after the meetings and dialogues had ended, James sat alone in his office. He opened a small box his mother had given him when he graduated from the police academy. Inside was an old photo of him and his father. His father had been a hardworking man but had died in a case of police violence when James was just 10 years old. James recalled his mother's words, "You can't change what happened, but you can change what happens next." These memories gave him strength. James decided to write an open letter addressed to the entire police department and the community, urging everyone to join him on a journey toward meaningful change. In the letter, he wrote, "We cannot change the past, but we can learn from it. I invite all of you, regardless of race, occupation, or status, to join me in building a new Willow Creek, a place where everyone is treated with fairness and respect." The letter was published on the front page of the local newspaper and quickly went viral. While James focused on building bridges with the community, the Internal Investigation Committee of the Police Department completed the initial phase of its inquiry. Evidence from the video and witness testimonies revealed that Derek had severely violated professional conduct standards. An emergency meeting was held at the police station. James, Derek, and all key members of the department were present. The committee delivered its findings. Lieutenant Derek Thompson abused his authority and acted in violation of police conduct regulations. We have decided to suspend Lieutenant Thompson and mandate his participation in retraining programs. Derek stood frozen as he heard the decision. He wanted to protest but couldn't deny the undeniable evidence. As everyone left the meeting room, he turned to James, his eyes a mix of anger and confusion. "Are you happy now? You finally won." James met Derek's gaze, his tone calm but firm. "I didn't win, Derek, but we all lose if you don't change." While Derek faced suspension, James worked tirelessly to implement reform programs within the police department. He organized more training sessions focused on cultural sensitivity and fair treatment. At the end of the chapter, Derek is shown sitting alone in his quiet home, confronting the truth about himself. Memories from his childhood surface, memories of the events that shaped his deeply ingrained biases. The incident involving James and Derek spread far more widely than anticipated. In Willow Creek, a wave of support for James Carter emerged, particularly from communities that had often been overlooked. Human rights organizations, social activists, and even prominent scholars began to voice their support. James became a symbol of change not only in the town but also on a national scale. One day, he received a letter from a 12-year-old boy named Marcus, living in a distant state. In the letter, Marcus wrote, "Dear Mr. James, I saw your story on TV. I'm the only black kid in my class, and sometimes the other kids don't understand me. I want to thank you for having the courage to stand up. You're my hero." James sat quietly in his office, reading the letter for the third time. The simple words from Marcus deeply moved him. He realized that his story had transcended the boundaries of Willow Creek. To harness this wave of support, James organized a peaceful march with the message of justice and unity. Hundreds participated, including Willow Creek residents, activists from other places, and even police officers who sympathized with him. Meanwhile, Derek, after his suspension, was gradually forced to confront himself. In the early days, he tried to find reasons to blame others, James, the media, and even society. But as time passed, he could no longer avoid the truth. One evening, Derek received a call from Andrew, his childhood best friend. Andrew, a black man, had left Willow Creek long ago. "Derek, I saw the news," Andrew said over the phone. "I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. We used to be best friends. Don't you remember those days?" Derek remembered. He remembered the days they played basketball in the backyard, shared sandwiches, and dreamed about the future together. But he also recalled how, as they grew older, pressures from family and society had caused him to drift away from Andrew. Andrew continued, "You're not this person, Derek. I know that, but you need to change. Not for anyone else, but for yourself." Derek didn't respond immediately. The call ended, but Andrew's words continued to echo in his mind. While Derek grappled with his inner struggle, James returned to work with renewed energy. He understood that reform couldn't stop at punishing individuals. It required systemic change. James began holding meetings with all police staff, emphasizing the importance of building trust with the community. He also designed a new training program that included real-life scenarios to help officers better understand the impact of bias and how to address it. During one of the training sessions, James invited a local resident, Mrs. Linda Johnson, to share her story. Mrs. Linda, an elderly black woman who had lived in Willow Creek her entire life, recounted instances of being treated unfairly because of her skin color. Yet, she also stressed that she had never lost faith in the possibility of change. After her talk, many officers left the room quietly, their expressions contemplative. James realized that while change wouldn't happen overnight, the seeds had been planted. Derek decided to attend one of the training sessions James was organizing. Although he felt awkward, he knew it was the only way to start making amends. During the session, Derek quietly sat in the corner, listening to stories from community members he had once disregarded. One story struck a deep chord with him. A father spoke about his 15-year-old black son, who had been mistreated by police simply for wandering into a wealthy neighborhood by mistake. When the training ended, Derek stood up and walked over to James. Hesitant but determined, he finally said, "I don't know where to start, but I want to make things right. I was wrong, and I need help." James looked at Derek, sensing the sincerity in his eyes. He nodded and replied, "Start by listening. Show me that you're committed to change, not just with words but with actions." From that day forward, Derek began participating in community activities organized by James. He worked alongside the people he had once judged, listened to their stories, and gradually began to shift his perspective. The town of Willow Creek began to see positive changes. But the transition was far from easy. A group of conservative police officers, who had previously supported Derek, started expressing dissatisfaction with James's reforms. They argued that the training on bias and cultural sensitivity was merely empty theory, and that it weakened the authority of the police. One evening, a serious incident occurred. A peaceful protest organized by the community in support of the reforms turned tense when counter-protesters infiltrated the crowd, shouting insults and inciting violence. The protesters quickly became targets of heavy-handed actions by a group of conservative officers within the department. James arrived at the scene immediately and worked to de-escalate the situation. Stepping onto a makeshift platform, he took the microphone and addressed the crowd. "Willow Creek is changing, and I know change is not easy, but violence is not the answer. We cannot let hatred overshadow what we've worked so hard to achieve." His words helped calm the situation, but James knew the tension was still simmering beneath the surface. Meanwhile, a video capturing the actions of the conservative officers spread rapidly on social media, once again putting Willow Creek in the national spotlight. Derek, after witnessing the incident and realizing that his own conservative attitude in the past had contributed to similar actions, felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. He decided he could no longer remain silent. One day, Derek walked into James's office, standing before the desk. He looked directly at the man who had once been his greatest adversary and said, "James, I was wrong, not just that night, but in how I've lived and worked. I've carried biases and allowed them to influence how I treated others. I don't expect your forgiveness right away, but I want to do something to make it right." James looked at Derek, sensing the sincerity in his words. After a brief pause, he replied, "Apologizing is the first step, Derek, but to truly make amends, you need to take action. Join me in the community dialogues. Listen and understand what they've been through." Derek nodded, and from that day forward, he became one of the most active participants in James's reform initiatives. Not long after, Derek decided to publicly apologize to the entire police department and the community. At a large town hall meeting, he stood before the crowd, his voice shaky but resolute. "My name is Derek Thompson, and I was wrong. I let my biases dictate my actions. I want to apologize to everyone who has been hurt by what I've done, especially Chief Carter. I am committed to doing everything I can to make amends and support change." Applause broke out from some in the audience, while others remained skeptical. But Derek knew this was only the first step in a long journey. With the support of Derek and a group of enthusiastic young police officers, James began implementing comprehensive reforms within the Willow Creek Police Department. One of the first initiatives was the establishment of a community oversight committee, comprising both residents and police officers. This committee was tasked with reviewing and addressing complaints related to police behavior, ensuring transparency and accountability. James also organized monthly workshops where police officers and community members could meet, share stories, and work toward better understanding one another. Initially, these workshops faced significant challenges, as both sides carried suspicion and fear, but over time, genuine dialogues began to take place. Derek became one of the facilitators of these workshops. He openly shared his story, unafraid to talk about his past mistakes and the lessons he had learned. His candid admissions created a strong connection, inspiring others to share their own stories. One memorable moment occurred when an elderly black man, Mr. Henry Robinson, stood up and said, "Derek, I used to hate you, but today, I see the change in you. If you can change, I believe we all can." The room erupted in applause. Over time, the changes within the Willow Creek Police Department began to yield positive results. Complaints about police misconduct dropped significantly. The workshops and training programs continued to see strong participation from both officers and the community. James became a symbol not only in Willow Creek but also on a national level. He was invited to conferences to share his story and advocate for police reform in other places. During an honorary ceremony in the town, James was presented with an award for his remarkable contributions to change and reconciliation. As he stepped up to accept the award, he said, "What we've achieved is not the work of one individual but the result of everyone coming together. Willow Creek has taught me that change is never easy, but it is always possible when we're willing to listen and take action." In the audience, Derek sat quietly, a faint smile on his face. He knew that despite his past mistakes, he had played a role in the progress they had made. The story concludes with the image of James and Derek shaking hands in front of the entire community. It was more than just a handshake. It was a symbol of reconciliation, unity, and hope. Willow Creek gradually became a national focal point, celebrated as a model for successful police reform. James Carter, through his tireless efforts, not only earned the trust of his community but also gained recognition from senior leaders, human rights organizations, and other law enforcement agencies. One day, James received an invitation to attend the National Police Reform Conference, where leaders from across the United States would gather to share ideas and experiences. James prepared a heartfelt speech, fully aware that this responsibility extended far beyond himself. Before leaving Willow Creek for the conference, James held a small meeting with his police team. He said, "Our success is not mine alone. It's thanks to all of you, this community, and the difficult steps we've taken together. At the conference, I don't just want to tell my story, I want to tell our story. The story of a small town filled with courage and a hunger for change." At the conference, James's speech received resounding applause. He shared not only the policies he had implemented but also his personal journey, the challenges, the pain, and the hopes he had carried throughout his life. His stories resonated deeply, particularly with young officers in the audience. While James was busy with his commitments outside of Willow Creek, Derek remained in the town, continuing his journey of redemption. He became an active participant in community activities, from organizing youth meetings to assisting families in need. One day, Derek visited Marcus, the boy who had written a letter to James. Marcus lived with his grandmother in a small house on the outskirts of town. Enthralled by stories of police work, the boy dreamed of one day becoming a justice-driven officer like James. Derek brought a gift with him, a notebook he had used during his early years as a police officer. "Marcus, this is for you," Derek said. "Inside this notebook are lessons I've learned, both good and bad. I want you to understand that being a police officer isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about protecting people. You'll do better than I ever did. I'm sure of it." Marcus looked at Derek, his eyes lighting up with gratitude. It was a small moment, but one filled with profound meaning for both of them. Willow Creek was no longer the divided and prejudiced town it once was. James's initiatives had fostered a new atmosphere, one where people were willing to engage in dialogue and support one another. A significant event was held, Willow Creek Unity Day, where all members of the community and the police department came together to participate in activities such as sports competitions, speeches, and cultural performances. Derek, now a member of the Community Oversight Committee, was invited to speak, standing before the crowd. He took a deep breath and said, "Today, I stand here not as a police lieutenant, but as a citizen of Willow Creek. I once let prejudice cloud my vision and caused harm that I cannot undo. But through this journey, I've learned that it's never too late to change, and the power of forgiveness is limitless." His words earned thunderous applause. The skeptical gazes that once followed him had now turned into acceptance and respect. James also attended the event, but this time, he stood quietly among the crowd, observing the community he had dedicated himself to building. An elderly woman approached him, took his hand, and said, "James, you did it. Willow Creek owes you so much." James smiled and replied, "No, we all did this. I'm just a part of the journey." Over time, the changes in Willow Creek not only endured but became the standard. Neighboring towns began to adopt their model, and James became a mentor to other leaders across the country. One day, James received an invitation to attend Marcus's graduation, the boy who had grown up to become a young police officer. During the ceremony, Marcus gave a speech. "I stand here today because of those who believed in me, who showed me that justice is not just a concept, it's how we live and treat one another. And my hero, Chief James Carter, is living proof of that." Seated among the guests, James quietly wiped away a tear. He knew that his efforts had helped create a new generation, one no longer bound by prejudice and fear. The story closes with James returning to Willow Creek. Standing on a hill overlooking the town, he saw streets full of light, people smiling, and police officers working in harmony with the community. "We've changed," James thought to himself, "and we will keep changing."